Welcome to Script to Screen's Talks podcast. Script to Screen is a charitable organisation dedicated to developing the craft and culture of storytelling for the screen in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This talk series brings the creative community together to hear inspirational speakers talk about their creative process, craft, philosophy, and the creative landscape. Script to Screen is pleased to share with you Working with Canada, Meet the Experts. 3 Canadian guests with diverse backgrounds and experiences will discuss international co-productions and industry trends in Canada. The shared concerns, values, and history of New Zealand and Canada make them an ideal country to partner with. Fraser Ash has worked with renowned creatives on complex film and TV productions. Alain Strati has industry knowledge from his policy and government relations work at the Canadian Media Producers Association. And Paula Devonshire, a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte First Nation, brings unique values from her work in the Canadian screen industry. This talk was moderated by entertainment lawyer Sarah Cull and was recorded live in Wellington on the 18th of March 2024.
Hi, everyone. Before we start, can you just raise your hand if you've been at the Co-Production Summit? Yeah, a few. It'd just be interesting for our guests to know. They're worried about repeating themselves, but I said, don't worry about it. Just say whatever you like. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And so where do you live? What do you do? Anything else you want to share or not, we can get into that later. So just start with Paula.
Hi, Sago. My name's Paula Devonshire. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I am Mohawk and English. I'm Mohawk on my mom's side. I have been making films and TV for many, many years. I mainly work as a producer. Recently, I've been transitioning to be a bit more of a writer, and I've been thinking about maybe directing, but I'm still thinking about that. But I don't know how people do that, but that's a whole other story. I've largely worked a lot in service in Canada on TV productions that come up from the US, because that's one of our big productions focuses in Canada. And then I kind of split that between doing TV service producing and then domestically producing features that I creatively find and finance myself. And I largely work in Indigenous cinema. So I feel like I have my mortgage-paying job and my heart-paying job. So it's kind of worked out very well over the years to do both of those things. And so that's me.
Thanks, Paula. Fraser?
Hi, I'm Fraser. I live and work in Toronto. I'm from the East Coast originally, Nova Scotia. I'm with a company called Rhombus Media, which is one of Canada's oldest independent production companies. We were founded in 1979, so to celebrate our 45th anniversary. And I joined in 2010, so I've actually been there for almost 15 years now. We do narrative film and television, a lot of international co-productions. We tend to be genre agnostic. One of the earlier films before my time was The Red Violin, but more recently we've done films like Hobo with a Shotgun, which was Grindhouse, or Antiviral, Possessor, which are horror films. We just sort of are gravitated to the stories and the filmmakers more so than trying to fill a specific mandate, but we're pretty open.
I thought we could tell some stories to start off with, since it is a script to screen talk. So Fraser was telling me about a co-production he's just finishing between Canada and Chile.
Yeah. So
do you want to just tell us about that?
Yeah, this one was a long, long time coming, in that it started with another film that didn't happen. But a company in Chile called Fabula is one we've been friends with for a long time, seeing at markets, socially hanging out, enjoying the same movies, that sort of thing. And never trying to force a movie, not trying to let a business arrangement dictate creative. We're just sort of getting the stage set for when the right project came, which came right around 2020. It turns out we had been sort of independently scouting the same filmmaker, which is a Chinese-Canadian director called Johnny Ma. And he had been working with Fabula and came in and met us, and he pitched us both the same thing. And it was one of those, we know each other. So we set up a co-production between us. And we were talking outside, what makes a good co-production, and it's trust. And we had a decade of trust between the companies. So by the time it was time to, get into it, we knew each other really well. And we'd already felt out each other's creative strategies, how we handle, different pressure points when trying to close a financing. So it went well. We're in post-production now. And, as far as co-productions go, we're really proud with that one.
And how did you meet them in the first place? Just in the festival circuit, market circuit?
They had actually come to us for a film to do as another film that didn't happen for reasons that I'll probably actually talk about later, and that it was a Spanish language film. And at the time, Telefilm Canada was not financing films that were not in English or French and later Indigenous. So it fell apart, but just because of bureaucracy.
Yeah. And so is that the only co-production you've done, or have you done others prior to that?
Oh, no. Yeah, no. Plenty of co-productions. Red Violin was a co-production back in the day. We did Enemy, which was a Denis Villeneuve film, which is co-production with Spain. Possessor, the Baron Cronenberg film, was with the UK. We did one called The Boy Who Smells Like Fish with Mexico. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but it's honestly a core part of our business.
Yeah.
Our most recent film was one called Blackberry, which is notable in that it was not a co-production. It was, and if anyone's seen it or knows the story, it was just Canadian to its absolute core. So trying to take it to a New Zealand co-producer and sell the idea of it as a natural co-production just doesn't make sense. Like I said, the story has to drive the business arrangement, and there was just no way that could be a co-production.
Yeah. And so the recent one you did worked out really well, and one of the reasons is because you had gotten to know them really well over about 10 years, which is interesting. And the other co-productions, how do they compare to this one?
I mean, it's arranged. You never know. In our experience, sometimes the ones that don't work out well is when it's sort of a shotgun arrangement and something comes up and it's ready to go and they have their cast and they need to go right now, but they want to do it in Canada. And then it's like, that's often a harried situation. Yeah. Sometimes you get through it, sometimes not. But these, a film is a 5-year process or more. And then even, if the film is successful, you own the IP together forever. Yes. Like you're never rid of those people. So it makes it really awkward if, a project, and Ramos' kid 20 years ago comes back and there's still, a bad taste.
So of all the co-productions you've produced or worked on, how many was Canada the majority co-producer and how many was it roughly?
That's a good question. We generally try to develop ourselves. So majority Canadian is our typical business model, just because we like to scout directors, we like to develop our own material and find like-minded co-producers. That said, sometimes there's an exception to a rule. One recent one was we did a TV series called The North Water that Seesaw in the UK had developed with BBC. Andrew Haig was the writer and director, has gone on to do extremely well. So when that arrived, it was like, well, even though it was a shotgun marriage situation, it was great just because the package was so undeniable.
So that was co-pro with UK, did you say?
Yep.
Oh, cool. Interesting. So so we're talking about how finding a co-producer. You've talked about sometimes it's a shotgun wedding. Sometimes you get to know them over a long period of time. And so I'm interested, Paula, your take on what makes a good co-production partner. And Fraser mentioned trust, obviously, is a big thing. But in your experience, what stories can you tell us?
Yeah, I think it's really just getting to know the people and making sure that you share a common vision, that your mindset and your values are the same, and how you approach it is certainly at the core. It's always, do we love this story? Why are we wanting to tell this story? And then, a lot of it's about trust, and can we work together, and can we, be a team? And I had an interesting experience recently where I was approached about 2 years ago to work on a project with a Greenlandic director. And it's a very interesting story because, we have Inuit people in Canada, and this woman was Inuit from Greenland, and she had this really interesting pitch where she said, I have this coming-of-age story, and it's sort of like that movie Beaches, but it meets Goodfellas. And I thought, okay, I got to hear the rest of this pitch because this is like crazy. And it was this like really beautiful coming of age story. These two little girls growing up on this very sort of violent neighborhood. So it was like in that Beaches, these two girls were going to be lifelong friends, but in this very normalized violent world. So I jumped on a plane and I flew to Greenland and I spent a week living with her family and traveling around. And I'm like, oh, I really like her. I think we can work together. And then recently I was in Norway with her pitching the project at a pitch market, and I fell on the ice and she sat in the hospital with me while someone reset the bones in my hand and stroked my hair. And I'm like, this is a good partnership. This is someone who I think I can depend on for just about anything. So, those ones are really good. I have a lovely partnership with a New Zealand team here who are loyally sitting in the audience and watching us talk about this stuff all again. Hello. And, I've known Carrie for years now. We met through Imaginative, which is an Indigenous film festival where she had brought her film to Canada. And we had this like little love affair in front of the cinema by the rubbish bins and hugged it out. And then we've been like, so she came to Canada. I've come down here. We've traveled all around together and I've met all of her wonderful partners, Harriet. And so, I feel like you just really need to get to know each other and understand that your partners, are the real deal. Because I've also had the other side of it where I've partnered with projects, which we won't name, where I found out like my partner seemed lovely, but they actually had no reach, no real contacts in getting funding and getting access and getting cast. And as I put together my nice little package in Canada and pulled in all my distributors and money, and then it was just little crickets on the other side of like, what are you guys doing over there? And then finally I kind of talked to their funders and they're like, oh yeah, we don't fund those. Oh. And then that project just went away. But it was like, several years of work
interesting.
That went into that. So you really need to know who you're,
get to know them personally. Yeah. Can you trust them? And have you got the same tastes? Have you got the same values? And are they as good as they say they are? And can they do what they say they're going to do? Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I guess is kind of getting references, talking to other people that have worked with them or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
I'll interject because I'm not doing a co-production. But in my black little folder here is we're working almost finalizing a report we do every year called Profile. And Profile is a profile of the Canadian film and television industry. And in it has information about how many co-productions. So we get information from all the agencies like Ontario Creates, like Cavco Heritage, all the partners you heard provide information. We compile and publish the information. So you will see information on the numbers of co-productions, the values, different countries. And you'll see that over even a 10-year trajectory. So you get a sense of what the activity is in Canada. And also how many projects are majority or minority. So that's also in there as well. So you have a 10-year trajectory just to get a sense of what the industry profile is of Canada, and it's easy to grab and easy to get the information.
One thing I want to jump in and say quickly too, we talked about it at the co-production summit, but for people who weren't there, Canada is a co-producing country. We have treaties with over 60 countries. Like new treaties coming online all the time. There's a South Korea one that's going to be signed later. Like it's nonstop. So it really is because we have that giant neighbor to the south of us. It's how we can pool resources and compete at that level.
So Alain, from your in your role, you would be sort of looking at the challenges facing the industry and how you can respond to those. And so what are you seeing at the moment are the main challenges, and what are what's your organization planning to do or doing about these things?
I mean, there are challenges like everywhere. Every jurisdiction is different. There are challenges and there's some successes. I mean, Paula talked about service production in Canada is a success. It's the strikes, earlier or late last year didn't help, but there's been a trajectory of production activity in foreign service production. At the same time, the domestic production is under pressure. And it's under pressure for the same reason you see it under pressure in jurisdictions across the world, including New Zealand, because the traditional revenues which supported all that used to be advertising revenues, then it was subscriptions. But even those subscriptions now are going to subscriptions which are from foreign services. So Canada had a really good, still has a very good domestic market where the broadcasters and the services were Canadian, so they would contribute to Canadian content. So Was it the mortgage? It wasn't the mortgage. It was the other part. What was it the fun, creative, the love, the love. So there's less love in your life. But the shift of what the government is trying to do is the policy instruments of the past is try and change them for the future. And the future is that it's no longer the domestic players only. There are now foreign streamers that are available in Canada. So Canadians, like the three of us, we subscribe to foreign services. I'm sure you do the same. So the government is trying to put in place where just like a domestic broadcaster would contribute to Canadian content, the foreign streamers would also contribute. We're just starting. Some jurisdictions like France are very advanced that have put in what we would consider very strong quotas in terms of production and independent production in different genres even. I know Australia is talking to us because we're sort of next up, if you will, and people are pointing to Canada. But we're all sharing ideas and stories as to how to build and maintain a structure that can support domestic content, because that's really critical.
So you're looking at getting the streamers to have a quota in each territory of local content. So they would commission that content, or they would support the local broadcast, or how would that work?
So in France, France, there's different, because there was always a cinema levy from World War II, so that's different. But in Canada, we have a kind of a levy where the cable and satellite companies would contribute to a fund that would support Canadian programming. So in France, they have the levy plus an additional contribution based on how much revenue they're generating. So in Canada, we apply our own policy and try and develop it for the future. So we're talking about a levy at first, which is a minimum contribution that would go into a fund, and the fund would be distributed to projects, the Canadian projects. There's significant number of envelopes, genres, opportunity, digital, et cetera. It's kind of a complicated funding infrastructure with many different objectives. But the principle is that resources are available for Canadian production. So those resources have been dwindling the last few years because there's less money coming into the system. So what is to backfill that and to bring the streamers into the system, because they're generating revenue from subscriptions.
So at the moment you're thinking just a simple levy, which is a percentage of the revenue in the territory.
So we have a regulator, and it's building on that. So the regulator has started a process, and the levy is sort of the first part. So we have a 3-step process, which will be over 3 years plus, to integrate the streamers, but frankly, to also integrate them with the Canadian broadcasters. So it's going to be a complicated sort of process, but the principle is to generate and have more resources for domestic content.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Someone's got a burning question. So the question is, how does the levy get to the filmmaker, and do they have some sort of say?
Yeah. So the answer, I'm not going to be able to give you the right answer, because in Canada, the way it works now is there's a fund, and broadcasters are designated on envelopes on a number of different things, including how much they've invested the last 3 years, how much audience success they've had, a number of different variables. But now you bring in the streamers, and the streamers will say, I want to access the fund. So there will be new factors, new variables to consider. But the principle to what is the same. The principle will be just like the broadcaster can access a domestic fund that they contribute to. The variables, the quantities, the amounts will be, the streamer should also be able to access the fund. And then from that is control, ownership, and everything else are other issues. But the funds have some levels of terms and conditions and protections, so that when the commissioner decides to do the project, that there's protection and participation for the independent producer. So it should work the same way, but we're baby steps. We're getting there.
Thank you, Alain. And so some people here will have projects that they want to know how to fund. How do we find the right person? How do I go about doing this? Top tips finding a co-production partner or a financier or someone to partner with you to make it doesn't need to be a co-production, but just top tips. I'm going to start with you, Paula.
I think it's what I was saying before. I mean, attending these kind of summits are the perfect way to get to know people because we're here together for, we've been here, what is it now? Jet lag, I'm forgetting. But we're 3 days here in Wellington, and a lot of us are going to Maoriland, and then a lot of us are hanging out here. So you've got this great opportunity to spend time, get to know people, go out for dinner with them, and then continue those relationships. So I think just traveling out, going to markets, being able to spend face time with people because you can have those shotgun marriages like you were talking about of like, we've got this production and it's 80% financed and you want to come in and do it, but then, you haven't really dated them per se. So you want to know that, that you've got a love match there and it's going to be a whole lot easier. So I think just getting yourself out there, spending the time, I know it's hard because like we also live in a country that's very far away from everything. So getting ourselves over to Cannes and Berlin, it's like, we're lucky that we've got a country that supports our travel, like our province of Ontario is particularly wonderful in terms of like supporting we have an export fund that allows producers to travel to markets to make these kind of meetings. And I know that New Zealand has similar incentives as well. So I just try to get out there as much as possible, and that's how I meet people.
Yeah. What about you, Fraser? Top tips?
Yeah, I have a top tip that's also kind of a word of caution, which is just watch the films, watch the output of the company, see what they do, see what kinds of films they make. You'll quickly see, like, that's the type of company I want to work with. We have a similar vision. Start with that. The word of caution in that, though, is like, so using Possessor as an example, we then got contacted by everyone who wanted to do a Possessor-type movie, which is sort of like, okay, we've done that. We don't want to do the same thing, but it's about, finding that right sensibility. And I would say just start reaching out. Like Canada, I'm sure it's the same. I know it's the same here. Like it's a small community. And if a project comes in and, it's like, this doesn't quite seem right, but like, I think Paula might respond to that. Like this happens all the time. So just start, just do the research, watch the films and start reaching out to people and you'll probably get pointed in a helpful direction.
Yeah. Alain, anything to add?
I did work for a while at a broadcaster where I was the commissioning person of the broadcasting, but I would only add just sort of color commentary that we were at a lunch and I was telling Fraser that someone mentioned sort of an idea, an interesting sort of, if you will, small pitch for, a movie idea. And I didn't really say much at the time because I thought it was kind of interesting, and we both thought that's an interesting sort of idea. So you never know.
I guess I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just about having the conversations, and the opportunity for the conversations is what you never know what it can lead to.
Yeah,
it could take 10 years on that co-production.
And this isn't really about Canada specifically, but for the writers, directors in the audience who are not producers, how do they find a producer? Same thing, or got any tips for that?
I can go first and say our philosophy is really generally, there's always exceptions, relationship and vision first. Or rarely do we option a book with no plan for it. We have done that, and there are always exceptions. But generally, we'll meet a writer, meet a director, like something previously they've done, and say, what do you want to do next? And that's the first question. And then maybe they'll say something that excites us and maybe not. And then, but 9 times out of 10, it starts with a relationship with a person whose work we like and want to do something else with. Very rarely are we just we don't have a shelf of books and we're trying to start with that. I don't know if that's helpful or not because I'm sure.
Do you call them or do they call you?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Paula?
Yeah, it's certainly both. Certainly there's films that I've seen that I really like the director and I contact them to see what they're doing next and find a way to work together. And certainly I've had projects where I've had an existing script that didn't have a director attached, which is usually less common, and going out and trying to find the right suitable director to attach to that. But I've also had directors seek me out and say, we want to work with you. I don't know if Gail's in here. Gail, are you here? Gail hunted me down like an animal and just said, you're producing my film. And I was not allowed to say no, and we're producing it this year. So and she just was like, we're making this film. You're going to be my producer. I want you to be my producer. And then finally I read it. I'm like, wow, this is a really good script. But, so it happens both ways.
So what's the baseline for Canadian content if you're going to produce something? And presumably get funding for it. Yeah.
I think it can be a lot of things. Like the project that I'm working on with my New Zealand pals is about a Canadian person coming to New Zealand. It's all set in New Zealand, but it really has her human perspective of the situation. So it really is about one individual being in this setting. And that's enough to trigger it, because it is like her view of the situation from a Canadian's point of view. And there is a co-lead that's a New Zealand lead. So it is that sort of magical story that really works organically well on all sides. So it doesn't have to be, set in Canada. It doesn't have to be about, some Canadian event. It can just be a Canadian's perspective on something.
I would jump onto that and just say, there are layers of funding in Canada too. Like, the tax credits are automatic, like the rebate here. They don't care if the story takes place in other countries. It's just about, the spend in the country, the labor. It's a calculation. When you start adding the discretionary funds, like Telefilm Canada, Ontario Creates, they would start looking at creative elements as well, making sure you, of course, qualify with your director, writer points, all of that stuff, which I could probably talk about more. But the point is, just starting at the baseline with the automatic funding, that's not discretionary. So, content-wise, it doesn't really matter.
I think you were talking about story, like what makes a story that would pass the test of qualifying. Yeah, I think it's both. Like you want something that resonates with us, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something really Canadian, but I think to Fraser's point, it has to be something that our funders would go, okay, yes, we can get behind this because it does represent Canada in some way.
But if it's compelling enough, like we often would go, okay, well, let's just do this outside the system. Like if it's not going to go for Telefilm, then no problem. We'll try and figure something else out. We would never just turn away a project that we love because we don't think it will fit in the Canadian box.
And I think if you've got a high profile enough director, a lot of lines can be blurred, and it can just be, it's that director's perspective, this situation that has nothing to do with Canada. Like that certainly happened before as well, if you've got like that prestige team behind it.
So with official co-productions, there needs to be a balance of creative content and technical content and financing, and so it has to tick the boxes probably. But that's when it comes down to, is it a minority, majority co-production? Maybe it's, what's the minimum now? Is it 20% or 30?
20 on most treaties and 15 on some of the newer ones, including the New Zealand one.
Right. Right. Good. So if you did a Canadian co-production, you could have as low as 15%.
As low as 10 if it's a multi-partite, but if it's just Canada, New Zealand, it could be 15.
Right.
Yeah, like Night Raiders was 85 Canada,
That's
15
right.
New Zealand.
Yeah.
Which is the minimum for that.
Yeah. And you can bring 15% of the budget for that, presumably, roughly. Yeah. Would that just be tax credit mostly?
It can be. There's so many different things we can pull from. Yeah.
Yeah.
But tax credit will usually do it.
One of the things I was interested to talk about was IP ownership. So when you have an official co-production, you generally split the IP or the copyright of the project in proportion to the co-production splits. So if it's like Night Raiders 85-15, I can't remember, let's just say that was 15% owned by the New Zealand producer, 85% owned by the Canadian producer. I'm just interested if you ever depart from that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I think, that the starting point is what's the copyright split, what's the financing split. It starts a conversation and it's usually reflective of what it should be. But like a great example is the Chile co-production, where we'd been working on this together for 10 years. It was shot in Canada because the story took place there. And so it was majority Canadian. But like it was very clear that after all the co-development together creatively, that like it was an equal partnership. So it wasn't even a conversation that it should be anything other than 50-50, because that was the spirit of the arrangement going into it. And just the fact that we had to shoot in Canada didn't feel right to change.
Where were the writers from, just out of interest?
He was Canadian.
Canadian writer.
Yeah.
Were the funders okay with that, giving Chile 50% of the... Yeah. Interesting.
I think it's always a discussion. Like I'm involved in another project that has got a Canadian writer-director and it's going to shoot in Europe. And so a lot of the costs are going to be incurred in Europe. But because the the creative IP is all Canadian. It really is shooting there more as a destination, and it's been developed in Canada for years, that the copyright is going to skew highly to Canada, even though the spend and the funding is a bit different. So there's a hand there.
Yes.
Question from the audience. Since Canada is co-production central, how similar or different is New Zealand creatively?
I would say it's actually, a risk of co-production is falling into that lack of specificity, co-production nothingness. And there have been, films over the years that you start to lose that anchor point of specificity between countries. So we're always mindful of that. One thing I wanted to mention too is, the rules change sometimes. And if you don't like the rules, nothing's more fearsome than a group of producers. And we're lucky to have CMPA advocating for us. The rule, as I mentioned, the Chile co-production from a decade ago that fell apart because it was in Spanish at the time. The rules were English, French, and they later added Indigenous. And that is not the Canadian film industry. There are a lot of filmmakers from all over the world, from different communities, many of whom had amazing projects that were not getting funded. And so after a concerted lobbying effort, it was fairly recent, 2 years ago, Telefilm changed the policy, and suddenly, there's, and I bring that up because we're still co-producing, but like with Japan, but the film couldn't be in Japanese. That doesn't really work. So, there was a Canada-Japan co-production that just, they're in production right now. So I just find it hopeful that there was a huge obstacle that the producers just got together and kept hammering it, and we're able to change. And co-productions are richer for it now and can be more specific to the location, not become this nebulous, nothing, everyone in Japan speaks English thing. I'm excited for the next round of Canadian films to come out because, we'll be submitting for international films for Oscars more. It will be, I think, a really exciting era for Canadian films.
Yeah, and I think it's up to us to push those changes. Certainly someone really pushed back on that language. So many of us did over the years that it finally changed. And I'm sure the CMPA had a lot to do with advocating for that. And then I was talking to you earlier about with the Greenlandic production, it's very unique because we don't have a co-production treaty. Even though we have 60 treaties, Greenland is actually under the Kingdom of Denmark. So Greenland doesn't want to produce through Denmark because Denmark colonized Greenland. So we were just trying to figure out, we really want to make this production. How are we going to make it work? And we've been lobbying the Canadian government to recognize Greenlandic Indigenous people as Canadians because we share a common ancestry. We share a common Inuit languages. So it's in the works. It's probably going to happen in the next year. So we'll be able to, because we've got these very strict points we have to abide by that, we've got these 10 creative points in Canada, writer, director, production designer, editor, composer, highest 2 leads. And it's how are we going to do this as a fully Canadian financed film because it can't really be a co-production at this stage. And we're going to be able to deem the writer director as Canadian.
That's amazing.
And then it can become a Canadian production and Canadian finance.
And we try, in terms of the CMPA, I think we work with members and, there has to also be a political will to make the policy changes. And sometimes the political will is not coming from the politicians themselves, but it is about, presenting that issue and that concern. And we work hand in hand with members. So often we will go and lobby the politicians or local organizations or local constituencies to talk about these issues. And the best, spokespeople for those concerns and those issues are the producer members. So we work hand in hand. We have a lot of committees in different areas like feature film. We have a feature film committee. We have a regulatory committee. We have IP committees that's looking at AI issues. So it's that crowdsourcing of concerns, but also then crowdsourcing of working together. We have a government lobby day that's coming up at the end of April. And we go and we highlight and we make our voices heard.
Government lobby day.
Yeah.
Tell us what that is.
Sorry?
What's that?
It's a strategic sort of campaign, but it literally is. We, the CMPA, will organize and it's producer members from across the country, usually teams in regional areas, working with some of our board members and some of our other committee members. So, for example, there'll be French-speaking producers or some from Quebec that'll speak with politicians from Quebec. Same thing with Western Canada from BC. You'll have BC producers talking to BC politicians, and we organize meetings with different parties and go in and talk about our issues. And at the end of the day, we have like a reception where so it's a 365 sort of day process, but it's an opportunity to really focus on those issues and talk about our challenges, but also highlight our successes and talk about our economic development. And Paula talked about service production, and to highlight where that service production is happening, how it's contributing to local and regional economic development, and how there are different pieces, cultural, industrial, to this sector, and how it can help, in many different ways, including just, great content.
So there's a day where you invite producers from all around Canada and government officials.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll have teams of 3 or 4 people, and I'll go, the 3 of us, we'll take another producer with us usually, and we'll go and we'll have sort of 5 meetings that day, working with different politicians and different people, and just talk about the issues.
Good attendance from the politicians?
Sure.
Yeah.
Some.
Or do they send their minions along? Yeah.
Or their regrets, but yeah.
Question from the audience. There seems to be examples of Canadian co-productions in New Zealand where the actors are brought over and the posters handled in Canada, but they are shot here because of the lower costs. Specifically with co-production in mind, where do you see New Zealand's future?
Yeah, I think it works both ways. I mean, it's just as easy to shoot in Canada. I think we both suffer the same problem of big studios coming into both of our countries, driving up the crew rates, driving up all the costs because they've got the big budgets, and they leave, and our poor little domestic productions are like, oh, geez, how are we going to pay for these crew who are used to making these exorbitant rates? So we suffer those same problems and have to do it. Like certainly Night Rider shot in Canada and did post in New Zealand, and the project that I'm working on will shoot in New Zealand and do post in Canada. So I think it works equally both ways, if that answers your question. I mean, I think you can just make it work. I think every case is specific to the project and the vision of that creative and what works best for it. But I just think we work well together. I like working with, I would love to work with New Zealand. I'm hoping that this all comes through because I feel like we're all have a similar mindset. We're like the little sister to the big country next to us, and we kind of get along because of that. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of goodwill and shared like-minded visions there.
Who in the audience has actually done a Canadian co-production? Ro? Simon? Yes. And how did it go? Amazing?
Amazing is a good answer.
Yeah. If you're going to do a co-production, do it with Canada because they're nice.
You're nice too.
Yes, there's a lot of animation with, I was telling you guys before, the ones that a lot I've done of animated projects where I think that New Zealand would be the majority, the originator of it. So it's kind of service plus in a way, yeah.
Yeah, just anecdotally, our own experiences, we're sort of talking and looking at 2 right now, and one is shot in Canada, posted in New Zealand, the other is the opposite, and they're both kind of driven by creative. So, and we're lucky that, both countries do have great crews, both have great post facilities. So ideally, it's driven by the creative and not structural concerns.
Audience question from a director. How difficult is it to get to know the ropes of co-production and how co-production works? Is it very difficult for a producer to get that experience?
I would say the stakes are too high to not have someone who you have the full confidence to pull it off. It sounds like you had to escape that co-production, but you did so
sensibly. It was in development, thank God.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't too late. And that, those nightmares do happen, right? And that can be really debilitating for your career for a lot of reasons. So whatever assurances you can have that your producer, has either done before, or if they're emerging as well, have a phone to talk to someone who they know who's done it before. And, again, when I was saying we pass projects, we also pass advice in the Canadian industry too. I'm sure it happens here, where just something new comes up and you call Paula, oh my God, have you seen this before? What do you do? That happens. So I'd at least make sure you're producer has that.
Or if it's a new producer to co-productions, at least try to get them to have an EP that can guide them along the way, because as Fraser says, the stakes are so high. Like if you go and you have your splits and then suddenly like one side really overspends to the other, you can really jeopardize your funding. And that's your livelihood, and you're on the hook for that money. So you just want to make sure that the person that is producing for you knows fully and understands the rules.
So,
because there's things that can disqualify you, and people don't read everything, but they don't know that.
Are there, do the funders or the tax credits in Canada require the producers to have a certain level of experience? You know?
I don't think so.
Tax credits, certainly not. Discretionary funds would take that into consideration as part of their overall assessment. But any Canadian producers here?
Yeah, I just think the funders won't fund the people that don't have the track records on certain
The
levels.
discretionary
like if it's
funding.
something that's lower budget and less of a risk, then maybe so. But on the bigger budget stuff, they want to be assured that they're handing over their money into hands.
Yeah, I think here, if you want to get co-production funding out of the Film Commission, you have to have experience. So, yeah. But as Paula said, if you want to work with a producer that doesn't have it, then you just get another producer that does. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Financing producer or something. Mm.
Question from the audience. Between film and TV, what do you find the split is in terms of content for co-productions?
I'm like 50-50 right now. I was hardcore features. That's all I did at the beginning of my career. And I still kind of love my features because I love sinking all my time and energy into like building one story and prepping it and getting it ready, shooting it, and just following it all the way through. But I mean, series are great too. And I feel like it's an equal split right now because series seem to be, I don't want to say any of them is easier to fund, but it feels like it's easier to get some of the series off the ground. And then there's more longevity to them, obviously.
Same answer for me. Just with the only other thing is that, in the Canadian industry at large, the service industry, I don't know the numbers, but it must be vastly predominantly television compared to film. Whereas I imagine New Zealand, there's so much huge features happening here. It's probably more film, but I don't know. But certainly in Canada, it's TV production central for the streamers.
But for your slate, if you're asking us specifically,
yeah,
or
for
just
our
in general?
slate,
Yeah.
And also just your observation.
Yeah.
I think everyone's about 50-50.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm doing, there's a lot of TV coming through. The co-productions that I'm seeing are just TV. So that's interesting. One of the things we talked about was development. Just talking about, because we've got writers, directors, not just producers, although obviously producers develop things. What's your process? How do you develop? And what's your journey from development to production?
Speaking about co-productions specifically, because that's what we're all interested in here, it can be a bit tricky sometimes because you're trying to satisfy entities on both sides. And I think most countries really want to focus on developing their directors. So everyone kind of seems to want to have the lead director. And that's where sometimes it's easier in TV because it's a bit more flexible to have writers on both sides because you have multiple writers. And so you can satisfy that a bit more. But in features, I find that it's been tricky to develop things because you're trying to approach our funding agencies who really want to push the career of our directors. But then, I've had situations where I've had a Canadian writer and trying to push a director from another country. And then Canada is sort of saying, well, we don't want to get behind developing something that isn't directed by a Canadian. I'm like, well, then how is it a co-production? And then the same on the reverse side of like, they're trying to get development money to support the writer. And it's like, oh, well, the writer's Canadian. And it's like, well, then how is it a co-production? So you need to get both sides talking to each other to make sure, like, we want to make these co-productions. We want to satisfy both sides of the creative. And it should have been an easy marriage. And sometimes it's not. So I don't know if that's necessarily answering your question, but it's always a challenge every time, just trying to make both sides of the co-production see the worthiness of the project, see the validity of the two creative sides, and that both sides are being satisfied.
So sorry, is it a case of with a co-production that might be led by a New Zealand director and a Canadian writer, that the development really, we sort of get there, the development really should kind of be done. So you're going there to create the deal.
Not Not necessarily, no. I mean, certainly I've tried to develop things at early stages, knowing in advance that there's going to be representative. Like I've got an Icelandic co-production right now where the director is from Iceland and the writer is from Canada. And it's been kind of tricky trying to get development on both sides, but we've managed to make it work. So I think everything is so case specific, it's hard to speak to it. And this also depends on the profile of the writer and the director that you're putting forward. And do the funders really want to get behind, the prestige of that person?
For us, it's always trying to strike the balance of, protecting the vision and the integrity of what the filmmaker, whether it's a writer-director or a writer-director team, what they're trying to do. When we're getting all the various inputs from the funders who are funding development, we have distributor relationships, we're joining sales agents. So we're very conscious of trying not rush things because, you can only make first impression once. So we're really trying to advance a script to a point where we all feel really, really good about it, but not by committee. So, and that's just, there's no right answer to that. It's just sort of trying to find the right balance of loss of inputs, but also protecting the vision that got us excited in the first place. It's sometimes takes months, sometimes years.
This podcast is brought to you thanks to generous support from the New Zealand Film Commission, Images and Sound, White Studios, and WIFT NZ. Recorded and mixed by Images and Sound. You can read more about our talks, workshops, and programs at our website, www.scriptoscreen.co.nz.